It has been an interesting past few weeks in the news cycle. The public has been continuously worked up day in and day out with no end to the chaos in sight. Where are we headed as a people, as a nation? It was once considered healthy to remain skeptical to what you might hear, be it from a friend, a news outlet, or a politician. Now, you are encouraged not to look into things for yourself, but instead, a certain interpretation of the facts is fed down to you, and you are expected not to question it. Does that sound like the amazing free society that you have heard so much about? Now, if you question certain things under your official name, people will come after you and your employers in every way that exists to put food on the table. If you think that a shady news story might be falsely represented by an authoritative mainstream media outlet, then you are likely going to face one of these lovely people.
Why don't you stop being an idiot for a second?
It's okay.
I know it's okay.
Are you mad Hillary stole the election from him?
I'm mad you're a Sandy Hook denier.
That's all. You guys are religion. You think that's like some big...
Who's my guy? What guy am I?
I mean, you like Hillary.
What guy am I?
No, you like...
You are not a guy. You turned in your man card the day you ordered that soy latte at Starbucks. These people will scoff with their inflated sense of moral virtue, equating skepticism with lack of morality. If something happens and it was tragic enough, they will attempt to deplatform you, silence you, under the guise that they are removing toxic dialogue or something to that effect. They don't want you to think for yourself. They want you to believe what they say with no questions asked. Who are they, you might ask? Even answering that question would be one of those things you're not allowed to discuss. To answer it would be its own endeavor, which would likely take a lot more time to dismantle. Treason, they scream, as if it means anything to those that can think critically. Questioning whether or not a claim with no provided evidence is true makes you apparently not only unpatriotic, but it is an act of treason, they say. It's difficult for me to listen and believe any talking head that was once an employee of the CIA, let alone a network full of them. These so-called intelligence agencies have acted on their own, seemingly going rogue throughout the past few decades. Did everyone already forget about the NSA overreach and Edward Snowden? How about the CIA and human experimentation on citizens? Sounds impossible, right? That could never happen. If somebody were to casually bring up in conversation that the government, or rather a seemingly rogue division of it, used federal funding to experiment on unwilling civilians, you might think that they were crazy. Surely there are things like checks and balances that exist, ways to prevent those in authoritative positions from doing whatever pleases them. Stories of espionage and mind control experiments are subjects best left to boring Hollywood movies. You might have heard about what is called MKUltra before. MKUltra refers to a series of experiments conducted by the CIA that spans many categories as well as parts of the world. Most of the documents that were part of MKUltra were destroyed mysteriously after a Freedom of Information Act requested them. But what does exist was a product of a clerical error, at least that's the official story. A clerical error, where documents were faxed instead of shredded. Right. Part of this program were the experiments conducted by a man named Dr. Ewan Cameron. Dr. Cameron served as president of the American Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, the American Psychopathological Association, Society of Biological Psychiatry, and he was also the first president of the World Psychiatric Association. This man seems to be associated with a lot of prominent groups. What's more interesting are the things this man was doing with American taxpayer dollars. In 1957, Montreal, Canada, at the Allen Memorial Institute, Dr. Ewan Cameron began MKUltra Subproject 68. His experiment sought to de-pattern individuals, which was his code language for wiping somebody's memories and their entire mind, to leave what he considered a blank slate for reprogramming. He would use electric shocks at 75 times the legal amount for hours at a time, some victims receiving 360 shocks over the course of a few months. They would be induced into comas with insulin while they were not in therapy. The next step after wiping the mind would be what Dr. Cameron called psychic driving, where speakers he had fixed into a blacked-out football helmet would be bound to the head of the victim in order to reprogram them. The victims were helpless as these messages were played 16 to 20 hours a day, for some of them weeks at a time. One person in particular was forced to listen to the same message on loop for 101 days. How might this be worse? Several of the children who Cameron experimented on were sexually abused in at least one case by several men. One of the children was filmed numerous times performing acts with high-ranking federal government officials in a scheme set up by Cameron and other MKUltra researchers to blackmail the officials to ensure further funding for their experiments. How dare you, how absolutely dare you ever criticize or question this organization or people that used to work for this organization? How absolutely dare you, sir?
Begin by saying that once again, the full faith and support for America's intelligence agencies. I have a full faith in our intelligence agencies. Whoops, they just turned off the light. That must be the intelligence agencies. There it goes. Okay. You guys okay? Good. That was strange, but that's okay.
Well, at least we know Donald Trump doesn't glow in the dark, but we'll continue on in this very, very uplifting story. How did these people meet this terrible fate, you might ask? One person was brought in for acute depression, another for headaches. These weren't volunteers or prisoners of war, these were civilians of an allied and neighboring nation. Of course, this happened so long ago. I'm sure the people behind these nightmarish schemes have just gone away, right? This is one of those stories that went down the memory hole, to be remembered again by the few who stumble across it. However, there has been some development in the story which necessitated explaining the backstory behind it. An article from last month, or actually it might have been May, explains not only the extent of some of these experiments as well as the effect it had on the victims, but also the details behind a class action lawsuit against the CIA. On Sunday in Montreal, families of these survivors gathered to share their recollections and traumatic history through medical records, as they plan to file a class action lawsuit against the provincial and federal governments and possibly McGill University. Though the statute of limitations has elapsed in many of the MKUltra cases, families are seeking compensation and a public apology. A teenager named Nancy Layton was hospitalized for mild depression and after being put into the care of Dr. Cameron, left with schizophrenia. Within 6 months, with the treatments that Dr. Cameron did, it turned her into an acute schizophrenic. She suffered greatly through the mental health care system. Of course, that's Canadian healthcare for you. There are estimated to be hundreds of people affected. I'll leave a link to this article in the description if you would like to check it out for yourself. If you don't know a lot about MKUltra, there's a lot out there, and I would encourage you to do a little digging for yourself and make up your own mind about it. Alright, moving on to our next story. You might remember this past weekend when comments made by Papa John behind closed doors were leaked to Forbes, who then wrote an article about his use of the word that should not be spoken, the dreaded N-word. Even though the context shows that he used it in a neutral manner, it still was not enough to satisfy the yellow journalist eager to earn a few clicks. Now we get to hear Papa John's side of the story. The PR firm Laundry Service was hired to help them after Papa John suggested that Conrad Kaepernick's Take a Knee protest perhaps was affecting their sales. Mr. Schnatter claims that an executive from the PR firm contacted Papa John's. This is from the CNBC article. Schnatter told Kentucky CBS affiliate WLKY that an executive at Laundry Service threatened Papa John's that, quote, "If I don't get my effing money, I'm going to bury the founder," unquote. The Louisville-based pizza chain issued a press release at 11:46 p.m. Sunday, saying Schnatter was prohibited from talking to the press or making, quote, "any further statements to the media regarding the company, its business, or employees," unquote. Papa John's was forced to resign. He has been removed from many promotions, and he has also lost his office space at Papa John's headquarters. All of this without any investigation of these blackmail allegations, or even considering standing up for their founder. It makes the company look incredibly weak when they can't even stand up for each other among themselves, instead worried about the 15 minutes of people complaining about them on Twitter and the inevitable short-term revenue loss that would follow. Speaking of revenue loss, HuffPo South Africa is shutting down. You might remember last year when HuffPo South Africa published an opinion piece that was written by an anon in drag to see if they would publish it. they did, and they were met with enough unrest on social media that they pulled the article and apologized. The article considered whether white men should be able to vote in South Africa. Most people thought that this was a legitimate article, and rightfully so, considering everything going on in South Africa. At first, the publication stood behind the post, putting out a blog post defending the article's right to exist on their website and complaining about the comments they received about the article. It was only when they learned that the author wrote the article out of satire that they decided that they now support universal voting and began looking into uncovering the identity of the person who wrote the article. Right? Instead of focusing on the fact that they didn't properly vet the article, they took issue with the fact that it was written at all. They focused all of their free press abilities and tracked the man down. HuffPo South Africa found the man's work, grabbed some cameras, and took the crew down to his work, where they confronted him in front of his peers, demanding an apology, and the man ended up losing his job over it. Well, it looks like HuffPo South Africa is getting a little bit of a taste of their own medicine, a little bit of karma. From their blog post, we regularly review our portfolio of brands. The HuffPost South Africa audience numbers are strong and consistently held steady on the list of top 10 news sites in South Africa, said Ismare Weideman, CEO of Media24. HuffPost South Africa was an important new voice in South African journalism and attracted a fresh new audience. Advertising revenues for HuffPost in South Africa have, however, been challenging. As an innovative and responsible business, we will continue to respond effectively to the market's needs and explore new digital opportunities. HuffPo South Africa and Papa John's aren't the only ones experiencing issues with their business. Netflix has seen its shares decrease in value following a shortcoming in expected new subscriptions. In the second quarter of 2018, the company received 670,000 new subscribers within the US, just over half of the 1.2 million expected. Revenue for the quarter came in at $3.91 billion, $30 million less than expected. Netflix shares have dropped by 14% since news of this has dropped. On top of that, Netflix could end up paying anywhere from $8 billion to $12 billion for its expenses. At worst, Netflix might barely break even. As I'm sure you are well aware, Netflix has rapidly changed as it has become more popular, right around the time that George Soros became a majority stockholder in the business, oddly enough. I'm sure it's just another one of those coincidences. Just like with Hollywood, Netflix has been compromised by people who seek to fill their shows with their political ideas. This is certainly nothing new, but a lot of people are starting to notice the change themselves and are unsubscribing. I think if Netflix continues in the direction that they are headed in, they will likely be surpassed by somebody who does what they are doing, but better, just like Netflix did with Blockbuster all those years ago. I never know how to end or conclude these videos, so here's just a short comedy video I made a while back.
It doesn't matter what comes, fresh goes better in life, with Mentos fresh and full of life. Nothing gets to you, staying fresh, staying cool, with Mentos fresh and full of life. Fresh goes better, Mentos fresh day. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life.
Mentos, the fresh maker.